In this second part of our two-part series on using HDFS, we have already done this, loaded some test data into HDFS via the Hadoop FS command. And in this video, we're going to investigate some other interesting CLI functions, as well as browse the default web GUIs for the name node. You must have been through part 1 for this to make any sense. And again, highly suggested that you've done the HDFS architecture and the HDFS file walkthrough decks. And when we left off in part 1, we were at this point. We had opened a file on this left-hand side, our HDFS exercises.txt instructions, and we had been copying and pasting commands over here. And we got up to this command right here, where we'd created a directory in HDFS. Now we're going to continue on in this document, and we're going to, again, do an ls command. This shows us all of the data that we have at our relative path on input data. And then again, to drive the point home, we also have a fully qualified path, this user Cloudera. And we should get the same results back from both of these commands. Just the relative path gives us a little bit of a shortcut to get to that input data directory. And there we go. We see the exact same files and directories that we had created before. And we can also do an ls on individual directories inside of our relative directory. So when we paste this ls on our input data directory, we should see all of the data sets that we loaded. And sure enough, there's the GSOD, the page view, and the Shakespeare dataset that we had loaded up in part 1. One thing to be careful of, it's very, very easy if you're used to using Linux to just run this command, just a standard LAT, passing it input data here, and that is going to return no such file or directory. The obvious thing here is that this is running against our local file system, whereas the Hadoop fs-ls command on input data runs against our remote HDFS file system. So just be aware that if you're doing things like tab complete, or if you're trying to run local ls commands, they will fail, and we fully expect them to. Over here, we're going to delete our junk out, and first we're going to delete our delete me later file that we had created first. We're doing this with the Hadoop fs-rm-r command. Control-Shift-V. So if we run our fs command on our input data, we see all that data there as well. Now let's actually go back and run this on our top-level directory. And sure enough, it is gone, as we expect. And if you noticed here, Hadoop, when we ran this command, responded back that it had moved this file into our trash directory. This is a huge convenience. This is something that is enabled in the VM and in the Cloudera Manager install. If you install from other sources, like base Hadoop, you just run a tarball install, it will not set up your trash directory. So when I delete things out of HDFS with the non-Cloudera install of Hadoop, there is no trash directory created. Each of our users does have a .trash directory, and when we delete a file out of the HDFS file system, it will actually move it in this .trash directory, which is a huge convenience and something you should definitely set up if you're running anything besides a Cloudera install. In our left window, let's go ahead and push our spacebar to hop down a page. And let's now point out that this rm-r command also works with files. And again, always a bit of a delay we expect with HDFS. If we run our ls command again, we should see that the delete me later directory is as well gone. Great, so let's look at some other useful things in Hadoop. We can run these cat and tail commands on various files inside of HDFS. So let's first do a cat command, which Linux users should recognize. It basically just takes the inside of what's inside this file and spits it all out to standard out, which we can use to get the full outputs of this file. This is useful for verifying information in HDFS. We can also pipe these commands because they're just standard out that's coming back to the terminal. We can pipe them to commands like less, for example, to page through this data set. If we paste this command back in with a pipe to less and we push enter, we see a little bit of delay as it's reaching out to HDFS, and then slowly the input comes back. And then here in the local file system, we can push our spacebar to page through this file and go up and down inside of it. There's also a tail command, and let's go ahead and show that here with this output of this poems file. And we're going to just run a tail on it. And this will output the last, I believe it's 100 lines or so of this file. This is useful to see if maybe we got through an entire data set that we expected to. Unfortunately, one would think if there's a tail command that there would be a head command to get the top of the file. There is not, but we can run a cat command and pipe that to a local Linux head, and that will actually give us the equivalent. Anything that we can do in Linux, we can do by piping the output of HDFS into the Linux file system and then working with it from there. So let's go ahead and grab some data back out of HDFS, and let's see where we are here. We're in the data directory, and let's actually maybe go to another directory. Let's go to our top level directory. So we see here we're at home Cloudera in the local file system, and let's go ahead and do an ls-lat, and I see no file named poems in here. So when I get this file, that should be pretty good proof that it pulled it down out of HDFS. And let's go ahead and run this with a -get command. And we're grabbing this data out of input data Shakespeare poems and looking at it locally. And this time when I do an ls on poems, sure enough, there it is. And I can even cat this out, and I can see that it is in fact the file that I pulled out of HDFS. After we do a head and maybe a tail on the poems, we could go ahead and then delete it from our local file system with an rm-rf on poems. If you remember, we ran several commands to see what's in HDFS. We did Hadoop fs-ls. Let's go ahead and do it with a dash. And if I look in here, I can see that there's an input data, and I can go inside of this directory, input-data, and I see what's inside of there as well. And again, we've been through the du and the df command. A lot of folks don't like using the command line, and for that purpose, there's actually a really nice name node web GUI. If we open a browser and we go to localhost 50070 is the web GUI's interface. And let's just go ahead and maximize this window. We can see here that we've got some nice roll-up statistics on the amount of DFS. Again, DFS is distributed file system. We see that I have about 23 gigs provisioned for my VM, and I'm only using about 2%. I only have one single live node. What we're going to do is actually browse the file system a little bit. So you can click right there. You can see that Cloudera installed several directories for us. The one that we're interested in is our user's home directory, which we can either paste in right there or simply click through. And we can go through and browse this data, which is very useful. For example, this page view CSV file. We can click into that and we can see the contents of what's inside of that file, which is very useful to go in and sort of eyeball and make sure that our data got copied in directly. And if we grab our scroll bar and go down a bit, we can see that we have options to download this file, tail this file. If you're using the Cloudera Manager install on AWS, you're going to see several blocks. Here we only have one single block on one single node because we're running inside of this virtual machine. If we were on Cloudera Manager or that 4-node cluster that we had set up, we would actually see 3 copies of this because the file was in there 3 times, had been replicated 3 times. Let's go back to our directory listing, and let's go up to our parent directory, and we can go back here. Here's this trash directory that Hadoop said that it was moving things into. And when we click in there, we actually see that we have permission denied. We, the Cloudera user, cannot go in and access this. But this Doctor Who user, which is always a mystery for Hadoop folks, when they go in, they say, who's Doctor Who? This is just a little joke they put in. This is kind of like a super user who can do extended operations inside of HDFS. So don't get freaked out and think you were hacked by Doctor Who or something there. If you ever did need to pull things back out of trash, Hadoop does offer several easy options to get that data back out of there. So let's go ahead and clean up our VM a little bit. We've got our test data in there, which is going to be useful for subsequent exercises. Let's go ahead and just close all of our terminals. In this exercise, we've wrapped up part 2 of using HDFS. You should have a good hands-on understanding now of the Hadoop FS command and the various switches that are useful for it, as well as where the web GUI is for the name node.